For more on the escalating crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by William Courtney, former U.S. ambassador to Georgia and Kazakhstan, and Anthony Salvia. He's the executive director at the American Institute in Ukraine. Ambassador, I'm going to begin with you. The result of this referendum, we're hearing 89% have voted for self-rule. So pretty much this is a foregone conclusion. But how reliable are these results? This wasn't a normal election, was it?
This was not a normal election. You're quite right. Reliability is a big issue. In many of the polling places, there were armed pro-separatist people there intimidating voters. Voting did not take place in many areas. Last week, the Russian Human Rights Commission, which is associated with the Kremlin, posted for a few hours on its website the real results in Crimea. Turns out in Crimea, only 30% of the people voted, and only 15% of the people actually voted, yet the Russians claim 97%. What we're seeing today in eastern Ukraine is likely to be just as rigged as what happened in Crimea.
Mr. Salvia, what do you think is the driving force behind this vote? How much of it is about protecting Russian culture, Russian language, and how much of it perhaps was galvanized by fear and propaganda?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the central authorities in Kiev themselves have dubious legitimacy. If you look at the way they came to power and the way the legitimate Ukrainian government was overthrown back in February. So I think that's part of what is motivating people here. They wonder, and shortly after the new government took over in Kiev, there was the banning of Yanukovych's language law that guaranteed Russian language rights in the East. So this gave rise to great concern in the East. So, are we second-class citizens now in our own country?
So help me understand, what is it that the people of Donetsk and Lugansk want?
Well, I think they want, as your correspondent in Donetsk pointed out, they have several options now. One thing they are very concerned about is being subject to a regime in Kiev of dubious legitimacy and involving elements that are extreme nationalists. Okay, so they have options now: autonomy within the Ukrainian Republic, independence as a separate republic. I think that wouldn't be viable. Possibly the Crimea option of incorporation into the Russian Federation, which I think also is probably not viable from Russia's point of view. I don't think Russia would want that. But I think what the Russians have been pushing for is broad autonomy of the regions within the Ukrainian Republic. I think that is the solution to this and a possible peaceful solution to the whole situation.
But sir, how much legitimacy can this region have when the international community, the United States and the West, will not recognize this vote?
Well, the legitimacy is in the eye of the beholder. They had no problem with Kosovo breaking apart from Serbia. In fact, they sponsored it in a process that was far from democratic. I don't know. I think that we'll look at the results of this. All the indications are that we've seen in the press reporting and on TV is that there was considerable enthusiasm on the part of the people of Lugansk and Donetsk for this vote. I don't think this was some kind of made up or thing done at gunpoint. I think there was genuine enthusiasm for this business of declaring their autonomy from Kiev.
Ambassador Courtney, let me turn to you. Do you think there are conflicting expectations from this referendum? Russia expecting one thing, and perhaps the people in Donetsk and Lugansk expecting something entirely different?
Well, that became apparent this last week when President Putin unexpectedly asked the pro-Russian separatists to call off the vote today.
And they didn't.
And they didn't call it off. I think what Putin is worried about is that what happened in Kiev was a genuine popular uprising with hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. Putin probably thought that when these Russian special forces and other separatists took control of some government buildings in eastern Ukraine, that there would also be a genuine popular uprising. Turns out it didn't happen. There were no popular uprisings anywhere. The Russian security forces just controlled some government buildings there. So I think that led President Putin last week to ask them not to carry out the vote because he was concerned that the vote wouldn't look legitimate.
So let me turn to the violence we've seen. Each side has pointed the finger at the other side. Ambassador, I'll begin with you. Who do you think is to blame for this violence that we've seen?
Well, most of the violence that we've seen thus far has been carried out by Russian security forces and their separatist allies. Some of them are paid Russian thugs coming from Russia, some of whom may be local people. There was no discrimination, there was no violence against ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine before these pro-Russian thugs came in. It was relatively peaceful. Public opinion poll after public opinion poll showed that in eastern Ukraine, large majorities wanted to remain part of Ukraine, not become part of Russia.
Anthony Salvia, do you believe these separatists are Russian thugs?
Well, I think it's more complex than that. I think you know, to say that all the violence is coming from the so-called pro-Russian side, you know, the bombing, the firebombing of that trade unions building in Odessa, I don't think was done by Russian authorities. You know, we saw there were reports of shootings occurring today in, I guess it was Krasnoarmeysk in the Donetsk Oblast. You know, this violence is not coming from the Russian side. So I think it's a more complex situation. It's hard to blame one side entirely. I think, you know, when you saw this kind of thing happening in Kiev back in January and February, when you saw the Pravi sector and these kinds of groups seizing government buildings in the west of Ukraine, in Lvov and in that area, and declaring them sort of independent and not recognizing the rule of the Party of Regions and this and that. You know, this established the template for what's happening in the East. And, you know, we Americans don't like what's happening in the East, but, you know, we should have seen this coming, you know, when we started this whole process.
Does Anthony Salvia have a point? Should we have seen this coming?
This is a surprise, I think, to most everyone. In Europe and America, everyone was surprised that President Putin would lead an effort to annex Crimea, taking it over with a tactical surprise victory there using their military forces, and then moving 40,000 forces of the Russian army close to Ukraine. A year ago, no one saw this coming, but President Putin has been tightening down the political situation in Russia, limiting more freedoms there, and it appears he's looking abroad for victories to sustain his support at home, which is diminishing among the educated and urbanized people.
All right, thank you so much. William Courtney, Anthony Salvia, we really do appreciate your take on this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sure, anytime.